two police detectives named Mason and Joel, who are about to arrest a drug lord named Victor Abbott, and his brother Griffin. While ambushing the Abbott brothers' location, Griffin, who is at the ready with his weapon, paralyzes Joel and forces the man into hiding. Learning of this, Mason tries to attack Griffin, and a shootout occurs between the two. After successfully paralyzing Griffin, Mason searches for Victor's whereabouts. Another shootout was inevitable, until both of them ran out of ammunition and a fierce battle ensued. Victor manages to take down Mason, and is about to kill him, but then Joel arrives with other policemen, and immediately arrests Victor and his brother. Before being sent to jail, Victor tells Mason that he will meet with Mason soon. After the incident, Mason, who was at home with his wife Jocelyn, was seen chatting about the pregnancy they had planned for a long time, but to no avail. Nevertheless, Mason still always supports his wife, and encourages her to continue to do her best. At the office, Mason is visited by a coworker who tells him that all the witnesses to the Abbott brothers' incarceration have suddenly mysteriously disappeared. What's more, due to lack of evidence and absence of witnesses, they were forced to immediately release Victor and Griffin. Knowing that Victor would soon be released, Mason immediately contacted his wife, as he was concerned for her safety, remembering Victor's threat some time ago, that he would come to see him. Unexpectedly, the one who answered the phone was not Jocelyn, but Victor, who was already at his home, and had taken his wife hostage. Mason went back to his house. On the way, he calls Joel to bring reinforcements to his house. Meanwhile, Victor brutally kills Jocelyn, without the slightest mercy. Upon arriving home, Mason is devastated when he learns that his wife has been killed by Victor. He was going to shoot Victor right then and there, but Joel tries to prevent this, until Mason finally gives up on killing Victor. Joel and the police manage to capture Victor, and put him in jail. Some time after the incident, Mason still looks depressed and dejected due to the death of his wife, whom he loves very much. One day, Joel visits her and advises her to go on vacation, or go hunting to clear her head. Mason seems to be considering Joel's suggestion to go hunting, but as it turns out, he had not gone to hunt animals, but to hunt Victor's brother Griffin to avenge his wife's death. Mason, who already knew the location of Griffin's hideout, alerted Joel and asked his partner to come with the police. After calling Joel, Mason immediately went in and ambushed Griffin. Without thinking, Mason kills Griffin while Joel and the police arrive. Mason is immediately arrested by the police for intentionally taking someone's life, which was deliberately done by him to be thrown into the same prison as Victor to avenge his wife's death. According to the plan, Mason was placed in the same prison with Victor Abbott. Mason is maintained and guided by a warden named Lester. However, Mason was visited in the cell by a warden named Will, who said that he was asked to come to the warden's room. Reaching the warden's office, the warden called Snyder tried to warn Mason that most of the prisoners in this prison were criminals whom he had captured, so he would have to be more careful, because perhaps the prisoners would take revenge on him. But Mason expected this and was wary of it. In the dining hall, Mason finally meets Victor, who insults him about his wife's death, but Mason then retaliates by saying that he killed Griffin in the same way that Victor had killed his wife. Sometime after, while Mason was doing laundry in the prison, he was approached by 3 prisoners, who promptly beat him. When Mason was almost pushed over, and could no longer fight due to being beaten, Ben appeared and immediately separated them all, so that Mason would not suffer fatal injuries. The next day, the prisoners were in the grounds when Mason, still visibly in pain from his injuries, came across Ben, who was monitoring the prisoners. Ben becomes a police detective before being expelled and becoming a prison warden. Ben then tells Mason that his plan to get revenge on Victor by going to this prison is a big mistake, as Victor is even more powerful in the prison. Victor has killed the most powerful prisoners in this prison, so he is highly respected. Not only this, Victor is further developing his drug business in prison, with the help of his 2 trusted men, Drexler and Booker. Ben then insists that Victor is actually just the body of the snake, not the head, indicating that there are people more powerful than Victor in the drug trade in prison. A few days later, Joel visits Mason in prison, to see how he is doing. But Mason then asks Joel to investigate inmates, who were recently released, as he assumed Victor ran his drug trade in the prison through them. Unbeknownst to Mason and Joel, Lester overhears their conversation, and informs Snyder of the matter. After that, when Mason returned to his cell, he remembered the names of his attackers in the laundry room, who were none other than Victor's man Marco. Flynn and R.B. Mason then create a simple, but deadly weapon from a pen to avenge the actions of those who intended to kill him. After this, Mason counterattacked by stabbing Marco with his gun, and the man died from blood loss. After that, Mason came to Flynn, who was alone, and strangled him to death. Knowing that his 2 colleagues had died at the hands of Mason, R.B. immediately went to Victor, and asked him to do something to Mason. An enraged Victor then orders Drexler to give Mason a warning. Drexler then sends someone to attack Mason in his cell, but Mason managed to knock out the man to a pulp. Mason is then called into Snyder's room, where he offers Mason a deal, which Mason vehemently rejects. Because Mason rejected his proposal, Snyder ordered Will to put Mason in solitary confinement. Knowing that Mason had succeeded in immobilizing his men, Drexler then went to Victor, requesting that Mason be killed immediately. But Victor told them to wait, as Snyder had no orders yet. After breaking out of solitary confinement, Mason returns to seek revenge on Airbay by seeking help from his cellmates. Airbay, who was walking alone, was called by his cellmate, who told him that Victor was waiting for him. However, when he arrived there, waiting for him was not Victor, but Mason, who immediately beat him until he died. Victor, who cannot remain silent, as 3 of his men have been killed by Mason, then goes to Snyder to ask for permission, so he can kill Mason as soon as possible. However, Snyder immediately denies Victor's request, as Mason is a respected policeman in the police force, and his death in prison would negatively impact his career as chief warden. Snyder then hands him a piece of paper with Joel Gaynor's name on it, and tells Victor to use the man as a tool to get revenge on Mason. On Snyder's orders, Lester then contacts Joel and informs him of the death of Mason Danvers, who was lured to the prison to lure Joel. However, upon reaching the prison, Joel is severely beaten by Victor and his men, and Mason witnesses the torture. The next day, Mason visited Snyder in his room, and asked about a deal that would benefit both parties. Snyder says he wants him there to kill people who interfere with his business because Mason, who knows so much about police rules, is also a ruthless killer. But before that, Mason made a request to Snyder, who immediately agreed. Mason apparently asks Snyder to help him kill Booker, one of Victor's right-hand men. Knowing that Booker is dead, Victor immediately goes to Snyder in his office, and threatens him that he will kill Mason immediately. Realizing that Victor will attack him, while they are in the dining hall, Mason deliberately attacks a guard to enrage Victor, so that he can be sent to solitary confinement. While in solitary confinement, Ben comes across Mason, who gives him a knife for self-defense. The next day, Snyder meets with Mason in solitary confinement to discuss their deal. However, Mason instead stated that there was no agreement between them from the beginning, and that he no longer needed Snyder. Snyder, angry that Mason has betrayed him, then leaves Mason and plans something. The next day, Snyder comes to Mason and says that he will transfer him to another prison, so he can't take revenge on Victor. After being released from solitary confinement, Mason is informed that Snyder is arranging for Mason's transfer to another prison to be expedited. Knowing that Victor was in Snyder's office, Mason then approached Drexler, who was alone, and beat the man. Shortly afterward, Drexler's men arrived and attacked Mason, but Mason can defeat them easily. After that, Mason drags Drexler to the roof of the prison, and dumps him right on top of Will, who is on guard, killing them instantly. The prisoners below take Will's gun, and create a mess on the prison grounds. In the chaos, Victor tries to shoot Mason, but the bullet hits another inmate. Mason then forces Victor to fight with his bare hands. As a fierce fight ensues between Mason and Victor, Snyder arrives and shoots Mason in the shoulder, knocking him down. Snyder then gives his gun to Victor, so he can instantly kill Mason. But later, Mason reveals to Victor that it was Snyder who helped him kill Booker. Hearing this, Victor immediately became angry and broke Snyder's knee, causing him to fall to the ground. When Victor was about to kill Snyder, the guards immediately tried to stop the big man. After successfully getting back up, Mason is attacked by other prisoners, whom he easily takes down. But after that, Lester points the gun at Mason, who he easily catches and then shoots the warden. Victor, who managed to defeat the guards with his strength, then approached Mason and the two again engaged in a fierce battle. However, just as Victor was about to kill him, Mason picked up the knife that Ben had given him, and slashed Victor's throat until he died instantly. In the end, we see Snyder trying to kill Mason, but then Ben foils his operation, which leaves him paralyzed, and Snyder is ultimately convicted of all acts of fraud and violations of the law during his tenure as chief warden of the prison. And the movie ends here.